Hey, I'm Jenny. Welcome to the Go Box. Today we're going to be learning a watercolor painting, the second one in the series of 5 that we put out in our first watercolor kit, which we just called watercolor kit number 1. And I'm going to guide you through it step by step, every little brush stroke, every color mixing, and all the things that we do. I have personally been a painter since I was 16 years old, which is well over 20 years ago, and I started with acrylic paint, moved on to oils, and watercolor has been a new adventure for me for the last, I would say, 2 years. I'm definitely self-taught as far as technique, and I've been having a lot of fun with it, learning as I go, which that's the way you learn how to use paint. You can read a lot of tutorials online, and there's a lot of YouTube tutorials on watercolor painting, just like what we're gonna do right here. But feel free to experiment on your own, and that's how you will learn what works and what doesn't work. That's how I've always done it. So let's talk about our painting today. So today is, I don't even know if I had a name for this one. I think this is the one I was really struggling to come up with a name for, which usually I'm pretty quick on that. But it's supposed to look like a wood slice with a mountain scene on there. And this, to me, it's like, I think about this as being, I don't know, somewhere in the Cascade Mountains, which I am born and raised in Oregon. So whenever I paint mountains, I just automatically will end up painting mountains that look like the Cascade Mountain Range. And then I have these little branches and tiny little leaves coming off. Let's talk about what we're going to use today. I'll put this aside. I'll bring it back up here and there to reference it. We want to use our coaster because we're going to trace that for the circle. If you don't have a coaster, or you want a larger image, you can use like a roll of tape. You can use an inverted bowl, just anything to give you a nice circular shape, but don't feel like you're locked into only this coaster for sizing. You'll want to have a pencil on hand, and you'll want to have your white Posca marker. We do a few little things, some details, little flowers along here, and then some highlights on the mountain, and then finally a little water current going on in there. And then you'll want to have your Micron marker. So this all came in your kit, everything but the pencil. And for the Micron marker, I just used it to outline the leaves here, which is 100% optional, but I thought, oh, that's kind of fun. It really makes them stand out. I'm going to set these aside. Let's talk about color. So I have a little practice sheet here. And you can use a scrap of regular paper just to see the color, if you want to play around with that, or maybe cut. I did send you guys a practice sheet of paper. You can cut it in small pieces or just use the front and back side. There's a slight difference. The front side, the right side is more textured, and then the other side is not quite so much. But let's do this. Okay, so colors today, which all came in your kit, we're going to be using the lemon yellow. And these are all concentrated and will be diluted. But here in their potent forms, here they are. This is the coffee brown. These two I use a lot through every single painting we do in this series. Mix them together and make a very good muted color. We're going to be using our ocean blue. Not a whole lot of this. This is primarily used in the mountains. We mix it with some yellow to get a greenish color. Very little plum violet. And I used the plum violet in one spot on here, and I was just kind of playing around with throwing some different colored shrubs in there. So you can do more than I did, absolutely, if you want. And you can even mix the deep blue with it, and you'll get a deeper violet. Lastly, I have Bombay Black. That's your India ink. Jet Black. And this is the one, I talked about it in the last video. If this is your first time watching us, I'll give you the little lowdown on India ink real quick. It is, it works a lot like watercolor, but when it's dry, it's permanent. Whereas any of these, once they're dry, I could actually reinvigorate them with a wet brush. This one, no, it will be permanently stuck as it is. I love how opaque it is and how black it is. I've used black watercolor lots of times, and I feel like it has kind of can sometimes have kind of a bluish or greenish cast, which sometimes will work for depending on the project you do. With all the projects we're doing in this kit, I opted to go with the India ink. This particular project, we're only going to be using it to mix with some of the darker foreground browns and then around the edge here to get a nice dark brown. I did put just a tiny drop on here. It'll probably be dry by the time I get to it. So I might, if I were you, maybe wait until we're ready to use the India ink to dropper it on your palette. Oh, speaking of palette, I didn't mention that. This comes in your kit. I use the little wells for the concentrated colors and then the larger wells for mixing. You can use a ceramic plate if you want, a paper plate. I think even our $6 wax paper sheet palette, I've used those before. I don't love them for watercolor, but they work. My favorite palette to use is these butcher trays, which you can find through Blick Art Supply. It's just blick.com. They're $9.99 plus I'm sure shipping. And they are an enamel tray, and you can really spread your colors out. There's lots of room to work with. Those I'm trying to find wholesale so I can sell them to you through the site. But if you want to buy them right now, $9.99, blick.com. And Blick is located, I want to say Illinois. Great. Most of my products and art supplies I use are from Blick because I have a really great relationship with them and happen to love their products. Okay, so those are our colors. Gonna set this aside. And there will be sometimes we use just the non-diluted color for especially these darker areas. But for the most part, we're gonna be diluting with a lot of water, especially in the background. And the background starts off really light and then it sort of fades out to be darker. So it's almost like an ombre or a gradient. Yeah, gradient's probably the right word to use. It's real light in the center and then just gradually fades out to this kind of a yellowish brown. We do a little drawing at first. It's very easy. We're just going to draw the circle and the mountains. I drew it on my watercolor paper, but I had to draw it pretty light. For you guys watching, I want it to show up on the camera, so I'm going to draw it really dark. And you can decide, there's room on this 6x9 watercolor paper to do 2. So if you want to do 2 wood slices, I highly recommend it. I mean, practice makes perfect. And you've got room to do it, so feel free to do that. Let's grab our pencil and our coaster or whatever it is you're going to trace. Go ahead and center it or put it off to the side wherever you want it on your paper. For my practice one that I'm showing you guys, I'm just using regular drawing paper. So I traced around it, nice dark line for me, but you want to keep your lines really dark because the lead in the pencil will sort of spread into your paint and it can be a real pain. You can't erase pencil once you have your watercolor paint on there. So think light pencil lines. I'm going to do mine dark though, just so you can see. So let's have a look at our mountain range. That's the only thing we're going to draw outside of the outline. This is, I just kind of thought about, like in Oregon we have the Three Sisters Mountains. And that's kind of what I was thinking about when I drew here, but then I drew the stepsister back here. Some fourth little sister back there. So I just made this up. But let's figure out where we want these to go. I feel like on this original, I could have gone a little higher with the mountain range because that would have given me a lot more room for water and the little landforms here. So if you want to raise up your horizon line, like my horizon line on this is right here. It's this line right here. So it's probably only about 1/3 of the way up. Maybe a little more than 1/3 of the way up from the bottom of this. So if you want to raise your horizon line just a little bit, feel free to do that, maybe 1/4 inch or so. And let's go ahead and sketch out a light horizon line, real close to the middle if you want to go a little higher. Doesn't have to be straight, it gets completely painted over. I'm drawing mine dark. Please draw yours very, very light. You want this to be invisible by the time we paint over it. So I'm going to draw the mountains. Now, let's talk real quick about mountains. I've been teaching at Gogh. Well, I've owned Gogh for almost 10 years. 9 years, I think, in October, yeah. And I learned a lot about how to word things for teaching, and mountains is one of the top things. I used to just say, okay, we're going to paint the mountain right now, and then I turn around and everybody had these witch hats or the pyramids from Egypt. And the height is okay. It's just the width. Mountains are about 3 to 4 times wider than they are tall for like these Cascade mountain range type of mountain formations. So yeah, the height is okay. It's just, it's not going to be that sharp. You want to be able to like hike these. And so think about that. When you draw these mountains on, you can erase, no problem at all. I'll go ahead and start with this little guy here, and then I'll do the middle, and then this one, and then finally the little peekaboo one there. So just gradually scooping up, coming back down. I'm not going to come down all the way because it's going to like bleed right into that next mountain. And then the next mountain is the tallest. This is Big Sister. And then I gave it the little extra point that Mount Hood has because I apparently can't stop myself from always putting Mount Hood in my paintings. Which I see it from my house, so I see it every single day that it's clear out. Now I have the other mountain over here. It can be the same, about the same approximate size as this one, maybe a little smaller or taller. Maybe I'll make it a little taller. It's just going to kind of go off the side here. Remember, keep your pencil lines light. I'm going to keep saying that. We don't have to connect this. We have a bunch of shrubs and things that go in front. And if you have room, you want to do another one back here. Like here, I'll trace one on there. You can. That's optional. But I want to do the one I called the stepsister. Back here. There is another mountain. They're tucked in with the sisters. There's Mount Bachelor, which is off on his own. But I think there's another one around there, but I might be wrong. I spent a lot of time in Sisters, but I haven't spent a lot of time like analyzing the exact mountain names out there. Okay, so there we go. You can, like this one here, that's a Klingon, that's optional. You don't have to put it on there. I thought, why not? You know, I've got this whole area, and then I had this sort of empty space here, which I have on that one a little bit too, but feel free to fill it on up with a bunch of mountains. Okay, so this was my practice drawing sheet. I'm going to set it aside. I did this on the back side for the lighthouse that I did, I guess it was a couple days ago I filmed that video. I'm wearing the same t-shirt. I just got this and I love it. It's got the ravens on it. Okay, so here I've got my light sketch. So if your pencil marks ended up being too dark, you can very lightly, I wouldn't worry about this one. It's going to get covered with really dark paint. Worry more about the mountains. You can just gently erase. A kneaded eraser would be awesome here because the kneaded erasers, those little gray gummy ugly things, they look real ugly once they've been used. When you first buy them, they're in like this perfect little block. But once they've been used a lot, they look like somebody's old wadded up gum. But they're great because they don't leave the little eraser shreds all over your paper. Okay, so I'm going to let you guys finish up with drawing your mountains on. We paint over them with a little bit of the brown, so you'll see your pencil lines for a while, and then that's going to go away. I promise. If you are still drawing and erasing and catching up, go ahead and pause the video. If you're ready to move on with me, we'll do that now. We're going to start the painting process. Don't judge yourself. This is new for a lot of you. And, you know, it's one of those things. Rome wasn't built in a day. It's going to take some time. Even the great masters, they've been able to use ultrasound technology and see practice paintings underneath their masterpieces. So, you know, they had paintings they really wanted to paint over, too. So don't put too much pressure on yourself. This is more about learning and having fun while you're doing it, and just doing something creative during quarantine, because we all need that. All right, we are going to now take, hopefully I mentioned that you need a little water cup. I don't know if I did. You do want a water cup. I just used these old little ramekins that I got that came with like some Costco desserts once, like a creme brulee or something. And I saved them. I use them for watercolor all the time. Or for like plant starts all the time. I have several little succulents planted in these. They're real cute. So enough of that. Okay, I'm gonna take my number 6 round brush. If you got our brushes, if you purchase the brushes, that's what you'll have. You'll have a number 6 round and a number 2. They will get you through every painting. I love these Princeton brushes. They are perfect. Go ahead and put a glop of water in your larger mixing tray here. And I want you to mix the tiniest bit of lemon yellow in it. We want a very, very pale color. So water is going to be, for those of you who have acrylic painted with me, water is basically going to be like, it's like your white. It's your color lightener, just like white is. And so anytime you have a color that seems too dark, you're going to add water to it. Now let's add the tiniest bit of coffee brown, just a touch. And a little more water. So you can see this color is very sheer. Let me grab my paper. I'll paint it on here. That's a little too sheer. You guys can do that too. Use your practice paper to test out colors before you touch them to your paper you're using. So I'm just going to add a little more yellow and brown just to darken this up a bit. Right about here is perfect. All right. So I'm going to take that. I probably could have mixed more paint, but I am really shorting myself all the time. Go ahead and paint a big circle here, right in the middle, and fill it in. Go right over your pencil lines for your mountains. They'll still show up because this is such a light color. And look at that, I'm already out. So typical of me. This is all definitely part of the learning process too, is how much paint do I need to mix? I'm still learning that. Okay, let's take this to, not all the way to the outside edges, but somewhat close. And now we are going to start darkening this as it gets to the outside edge. So this center area is nice and light and kind of beigey. Then I'm going to gradually bring in a little more lemon yellow and a little more coffee brown. Let's go ahead and dip your brush in the lemon yellow, mix some of that in there, add maybe a little water to refresh it if needed. Test it out if needed. Let's see, let's make sure it's darker. It is, not quite as dark as I want it. Right about here. Anytime you can add water and kind of extend your paint out. So this is just a touch yellower. Now we're going to start working our way towards brown. And that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to add, let's have a look at the originals. Let's see how brown we need it. That's pretty brown compared to what we've got going on here. We're kind of right in this range, but I do coat a little brown over the top of that. Let's take coffee brown, throw it on in there. Maybe a little tiny bit more yellow. I usually try to wash my brush between color changing, but I can get kind of lazy about it. And I'm just going to go right around the edges here and let this brown color just leak into the wet paint there. In fact, I'm going to force it to cohabitate in a second with some water. Don't worry about getting a perfectly clean edge. We paint the bark around here. It's not going to be clean at all. We don't want it to be. We want it to look like it's sliced right off of a tree trunk. Okay, so now I'm going to take and wash my brush. I don't want this harsh line. I want it to be more faded out like this one is. So water is going to be your friend for that, and just flood some water in there. I don't have any paint on my brush, just water. And I'm just, as I go around, I'm kind of pulling it towards the inside. And let some of these little streaky lines show up, because that's going to help give the impression of the wood rings, which we're going to paint on anyway. And that looks pretty good. It's about the color I want it to be. I could maybe add a little more brown and darken up along the edges here, but it's not 100% necessary. This is just going extra. I will be curious too, for those of you who this is a new experience for, and you know, a lot of you guys have been Vine Go people for as long as we've been in business, or shortly after we started, which I love you guys. Thank you so much for that. We really appreciate and love our long-term loyal fans. But in the comments sometime or email, whatever, I would be curious to know what you guys think of the watercolor, how you like it. And, you know, if it's something you want to continue. Do we want to do a kit number 2? I mean, I'm planning on it. But if everyone seemed to hate it, I probably wouldn't. But I think most of you guys are going to like it. What I like about it is the cleanup is fast and easy. A lot of times I will just leave the things out in my art room and come back the next day and just, I'll wash off my palette because I don't want dried paint in there. But I'm ready to roll. Like, I've got everything set up. You can even use your same water half the time. All right. So finish that up. We're gonna let this dry a bit while we work on the bark around the outside edge. So this is where, if you're still working on this part, go ahead and pause the video, catch on up to that. Remember, water is your friend. It's called watercolor for a reason. So if you need to smooth anything out or blend anything, just use a wet brush. And if you're ready to move on with me, I'm gonna proceed ahead. We're gonna be switching brushes in a minute here. I wanna do the bark border with a larger brush, and then these little twigs and offshoots we'll do with the smaller number 2 brush. This is where we wanna use our India ink. So mine's already, yep, it's dry. I'm gonna put a fresh little dropper in there. I only gave myself the tiniest amount because you really don't use much in this painting, and it does go a long, long way. So to make this color around here, it's India ink. Just throw it up there for mixing. This time I do want to wash my brush before polluting the brown. Look how quick that turned my water dark. So dark. And now the coffee brown. And I'll kind of do a practice brush stroke here. That's really dark. I guess it's pretty close to the same. It's going to dry probably a little bit later. But I feel like I could put a little more brown in there. More coffee brown coming up. This is where we're going to use a fairly concentrated, yeah, see, that's better, a little more brown. We're going to use a fairly concentrated color, so I'm not mixing a ton of water with it, but I will add 1 or 2 drops. And let's see what that did. That actually just made it a little more fluid, but intensity-wise, it's about the same. That's what I want. I want that intensity, but the water will kind of help keep it moist, and I know everybody hates that word. And I'll be able to extend the paint a little longer. So let's go around the edge here. Try to not make perfect brush strokes. I'm occasionally making some of these like overlap. Overlap like they're imperfect. The rough side of bark. Let me see if I have, I do, one of these wood rounds. I was inspired by one of these. Look at that rough edging of bark in there. So feel free to do that. I did one of these once. Wish I had thought to grab it and show you guys, where I actually put a cut up, like it was cracked up through the side. That was really cool. I feel like this could almost become a series on its own. We could just do a whole bunch of these. It'd just be the Woodsy series. We would have to do one with a big Sasquatch footprint right in the middle. So I hope you're keeping these nice and wobbly, jagged, imperfect. You'll make your brain happier by not striving for perfect lines. So you'll take that pressure off yourself. And as it's drying, I can tell it's drying a little lighter. If you want, if it dries a little too light for your liking, you can remix a little more India ink into your color and just go over this once it's mostly dry. If I were to go over it now, there's a chance of kind of it over flooding the page, overworking the paper there while it's still wet. But I feel like this is a good color that I've got here. And before I am completely out of that color, speaking of which, I am almost out. I just polluted my brown. See how lazy I get sometimes? I wanted to refresh a little bit so I can make these twigs. This is where we want to switch down to our number 2 round. Just wash this number 6 off, set it aside. Let's grab this one. So this one's definitely smaller, pointier, great for doing detail work. We'll use this one for these little trees and some of the little grass stands here. All right, let's talk about twigs. Every single one goes off kind of at the same direction. Think about the way bark is on a tree. It probably is like sort of overlapping as it goes around. I don't know. To me, it made sense in my head for designing this project to make each of them curve the same direction. Let's go ahead and dip this number 2 brush in the water. Let's start over here. I'll set this guy aside. And go ahead and swirl it in your paint. It doesn't matter what direction. I kind of feel like I have a lot of little things hanging off going this way. Maybe I'll fix that. But I'll just go ahead and make it like the original. Come off. And I sort of am following the roundness of this. You can notice every single one of these is tucked pretty close. Like I don't want to be going straight out. I think that would really distract from it. But every one of these I want to do some kind of little twig or 2 twigs off. Light pressure. As you lift the pressure, your lines get much finer. In fact, let's do that on the practice sheet real quick. Watch this. I'll start with a nice heavy pressure, lightening the pressure now. Whoa, look at that. It's all in the way you hold the brush and how much pressure you put. And then I'll do one up here that's kind of doing the same thing. They're always going to be a little bit thicker where they come out of the actual tree round, but thinner on the ends. Maybe I'll do one here. These little tiny twigs, the offshoots that come off of the main twigs, they can kind of go off to the side a bit. How about right here? Practice the pressure thing that I just showed you. You don't want to use the same pressure the whole time. Because look, now I've got a thicker branch and then a real skinny one. Nature is unpredictable that way. I feel like I'm drawing the same branch. I am. Every time I go around. It's like 3 prongs. So I guess I'm going to have to make myself change it up. There we go. I changed it up. Now I could probably fit one more on here. You might be able to fit more than one. There. That's pretty awesome. I like that. I feel like this first one didn't turn out as good as the others. So I'll just clean it up. This would make a super cool Halloween type painting. You know, you could do like kind of a pale orange in here. And this could be black. And let's see, what could we paint in here? A little haunted house, a jack-o'-lantern, a dangling spider, something spooky. And we'll put the leaves on these later. What I want to have us do next, it's probably the one part that'll make you a little nervous, but try not to stress out over it. I'm going to have us, we're sort of lightly suggesting these wood rings. This one here, I'm glad I had these close by. This is really, really high contrast. We don't want them quite like that because I think that would take away from our little mountain scene here. So we're just going to do some subtle ones. They are done with just the golden brown color. So that's just lemon yellow mixed with your brown, coffee brown. And we're going to definitely use this little brush, number 2 round. If you have a smaller brush, that would be awesome. I picked some up at Oh, where was it? Hobby Lobby. We just got a Hobby Lobby out in my town. And then that was right before quarantine. So it had to close. But this little mini brush set, $9.99. And I think it's Hobby Lobby's brand, which is Master's Touch. And there's like these itty bitty tiny little like 2 hair brushes. Here's one here. This is a little bit bigger. But if you have a set like that, feel free to use that for anything in here. Anything that you want detailed that maybe this one feels a little too big for. But this is the brush I used to do this. Every single painting I did in the project, in the projects for kit number 1 are done with these 2 brushes because I wanted to make sure we're using the same tools, if at all possible. Okay, so this is the color I want to make. Oh, it's dried up a bit, so let's take and remake it. A little yellow, and look, it's kind of refreshing that paint underneath. And let's pull in a little brown. So we want it pretty close to the color that's on the outside edge. And this is where, let me test this. Yeah, that's pretty good. I want to add a drop of water in here. Lighten it up just a touch. And I want to wash my brush and dry it off. Let's reshape the tip of the bristles. I just sort of pinch them together while turning the brush. So I want a real pointy end here. And then what I do is I just really lightly come through using the very tip of I only dip the very tip of the brush into the paint. And rather than doing these straight lines like I'm doing, which would be super easy, we're going to complicate things. But it's not super complicated. These are not, like this thing in nature, they're pretty round, but you can look and see they're lumpy. But on this one, I just was like, you know, I just want to suggest that they're there. And so here's what I did. I started in the center, and I'm just doing like a whole bunch of like parentheses type of shapes. Little like half circles. And I'm going to bring this out, you know, to close to the edge. I am hardly putting any pressure on this. It is like literally just, Bob Ross said it, so I'm going to say it. It's 3 hairs and some air. Just the lightest little touch with the brush. Holding it back kind of far beyond, you know, behind this metal ferrule part, kind of towards the middle of the brush. I'm just kind of hovering it over here and letting it sort of glide in. As you get to the outside edges, because the color is so similar, they're going to disappear. And that's totally what we want. That's all I'm going to do. But I am going to mess them up a bit, and I'll show you how we mess them up. So by messing them up, I mean we are going to paint a little bit of just plain water with a damp brush to kind of smooth them out, more like this one. These are very similar, but this one, they're a little more smoothed out. So 6 round will be the one to use. Go ahead and refresh it in the water. Dry it on the towel just by dabbing it a couple times on each side. And then see if you need more water. And then when you go over these, you can see how it just sort of lightens them up and smooths them, kind of blends them in a little more into the background. It's kind of like it's just smudging them basically. When I do this sort of thing, it takes me back to my childhood in the 80s. And they used to have these color books that were watercolor books, and it would have a picture printed, and then in the picture would be these printed colored dots. So let's say we had a circle here like this, and let's say that the inside of the circle was intended to be painted green. There would be all these little printed green dots all over this, and you would take your damp brush, so you didn't even need paint, and you would do exactly what we're doing, just fill it in with just water, and it just kind of wakes those printed dots right up, which must have been just dried watercolor. And that's how we did it. I don't even know if they make those anymore, but if they did, I think it would be kind of cool to get one and just be like, hi, I'm revisiting my childhood. So I like that. I like it a little more blended in like it is now. If you feel like you lost some of it, just repeat the process. It's very easy to do. If you feel like you need it to dry a bit before you move on, go ahead and pause the video. It'll dry within minutes, or you can grab a hairdryer and help it along. Let's go ahead and make our green leaves, and then that part will be done, and this will be dry, and we can move on to the mountain scene. All right. I'm not going to change out my water. I prefer, for the most part, to use tinted water. I feel like it kind of tones the paint down a little bit. These liquid watercolors are super vibrant, a little too vibrant on their own, so I will always tint them with a little brown a lot of times. And if you did the last video, you saw it, and I talked about that a lot. So here my water is tinted kind of a dark brown. That works perfect. We're going to use our little brush to paint the leaves, and we want to make a green, and it's going to be a toned down green. So we're going to mix blue and yellow, which you normally would mix to make green. But to tone it down, I add just a little bit of the coffee brown in. So I've got a little open well here. Go ahead and throw some yellow in there. Wash the brush. We're not going to water this color down a ton. Oh, see how vibrant that is. It's teal. And so I feel like that's a little too vibrant to go with this natural wood slice. And in fact, I can tell already I need to add a tiny bit of yellow back into that. Make kind of a yellow green. This is getting closer, but this is pretty much a Kelly green, which would be also too vivid. So let's tone it down with some brown. Just a little at first. There we go. That's pretty good. Pretty close. And if it gets too brown, just add a little more yellow and blue back into it if needed. So this is the difference between the colors. Very vibrant kind of spring green here, and this is definitely more of a natural foresty green. I could green it up a little more. It got a little heavy on the brown. Let's see what that is. I mean, it's not a huge difference. Let's talk leaves. They are shaped like little tiny almonds. So all I do, I draw the top arch and then I match it up with the bottom arch. If you want to get fancy with it, you can make some that are, maybe the end gets real thin like that. You can make, like, I like this leaf a little better than this one. You can make them more round with the pointy end. Kind of looks like fancy eyeball shapes. But when we paint these on the paper here, we're just going to paint the shape and fill it in, or you can do something fancy where you paint the shape, dip your brush in water, and just kind of flood it with water. And that gives you a little bit different fill-in. It's kind of more of a bloomed, like the watercolor just sort of blooms out into the water. And I could have done it a little different. Let's see. So I could have knocked a little excess water off. There we go. So it just sort of pulls that color in from the edges, and it leaves you with a little bit lighter tone in the middle. So rather than a solid tone like this, you've got some light and dark in there. These leaves are pretty small, so I don't feel like we have to do that, but this would be a really fun thing to do if we do a bouquet of flowers sometime, which I'm sure we'll do. Why not? Okay, now my color has kind of drifted away here. I didn't mix enough. And I just put these leaves on the ends of the twigs, and I can tell already I need to make more paint. And you don't have to put one on every single twig. They don't have to be the same size. But I just simply draw them and then fill them in. Almonds, eyeballs, whatever helps you visualize it. I love it just as it is without the mountain scene painting in it. Don't worry, I'm not going to leave us in the dark. We're going to paint that mountain scene in. But I do really like this. It's like kind of satisfactory. These would make this would make a really fun card. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever experimented with making your own Christmas cards before, or just regular cards. My grandma always used to do it. She was a painter, and we'd always get Christmas cards that were one of her paintings. And so like my dad or his brother would have to help her get that all sorted out through the printer. But I always thought that was pretty neat. And you can definitely do that. There's lots of printing companies that you could scan or email your image in. I did it once, I think through Walgreens, where I just took a picture of my painting, and that's how they're set up. They're set up to, you know, upload pictures, like your family picture. And I remember doing a painting, but I don't remember which one. It's been so long ago. So this, what I'm getting at here with my long talk about cards, this would be a super cute Christmas card. Like if we took this same idea, did the little twigs, but instead of, or in addition to the leaves, we did little red berries. And then maybe a snow scene in the middle. There we go. I've got our winter painting kit coming together. And if you're good at lettering, you can, you know, make some kind of like peace on earth or something. Lettering is pretty fun. It can be a little frustrating. For me, it's more of like, I just want to freehand everything, but like instinct tells me, okay, you need to find a center, you need to do a ruler, because a lot of times I've freehanded stuff and I get done and I'm like, oh, well, I'm gonna have to add a letter in here to balance this out. Usually I end up adding like a flower or something like that to just kind of offset the viewer. I'm going back here and just adding a little bit more paint to some of these that have dried, if they were a bit too late. But doesn't that look super cool? I just love it. Love, love, love it. We're gonna move on in a minute. We're gonna move on to the mountain range. And I'll just keep talking for a minute. Noticing now, like I said, this is the first time I've taught this one. I've painted it and designed it, but first time I've actually done the step-by-step teaching through it. And noticing now the purple plum violet is drying out. So that's any of those colors that you don't need a lot of. You use right immediately, right before you actually have to use it on the paper. Lesson learned. All right. Okay, so let's talk mountains. I have these guys with a light source. The light source is, because of how bright they are on this one side, the sun is setting or up in the sky somewhere over here. It's our light bulb, which means every little ridge beyond there, this left side of the mountains, is going to be dark. This right here is really darn close to Mount Hood. There you go, painting Mount Hood again. It has this big glacier, and it comes together like this point like this. And so doing the light on one side and the dark on the other, you really get that sensation of that glacier there. And so I did it on all of them because I figured it looked right, and I did like the way it looked. But we're gonna have to mix some paint together, and just thinking out loud here, let's use our little brush. I think we'll have the number 2 round. I think we'll have better luck with that because we're not painting a huge scene here, not huge mountains anyway. We might do a combination of the 6 round and the little guy. But I want to make a kind of a tealish color, slightly muted down. And so remember when we mixed the blue and yellow and we got the teal, and then I had us add the brown to it. We're going to do that, but we're not going to add quite as much brown. So let's find another well. Take the blue. I am going to wash my brush before I dab in the yellow. Go ahead and add it in there. So already this is a nice teal. Look at that. That's really pretty. In fact, in acrylic paint, there's a color called phthalo green that looks a lot like that. Now the paint on the mountains is not quite that vibrant. It's got that little touch of brown to it. So let's just add a dot. So it didn't mute it down a ton. I need to add another dot. There. It's pretty close. Any more brown, it starts getting a little too brown. But you can see that this is definitely more toned down than this real vibrant color here. And let's go ahead, wash the brush. Let's take and dry it off. I guess we didn't need to wash it. I just want to dip the very tip of the bristles in the paint. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to trace along the left side of the big mountain. And I'm going to create that glacier. So I do this sort of curved line. As long as you just start curving it towards the left, you don't really have to do anything else. Now let's create a watered down bit of paint here. And go ahead and fill this side in. We're going to be doing some layering, so we will add more color to deepen it and darken it as it goes. So I'm going to bring this down here. And now this cool part we're going to do, wash your brush, tap it off, just use a little water, and pull this down. So see what that does? That completely fades out the bottom. So in the end, it looks like there's maybe a little mist or fog over there. And I'm going to add just a little more darker green in here because I could really see my outlines. So I'll just sort of pull that in towards the center. Cool. Let's repeat that process with the other mountains. And we will trace down on the left side of each mountain. For now, we're just going to focus on painting the right side because it's pretty dark. All right, here we go. This side. Go ahead and make a glacier. It doesn't have to be this exact curve because they're all going to be different, but some kind of little glacier-y thing. It can even crisscross over that one. And fill in with the color. This can come down like this. They would do that in nature. This you can just sort of go off here and clean the brush, tap it off, take just water. Love that. I like that fade. That makes me happy. All right. Those two, that part at least, is done. And let's work on the others. So this one here, let's see, she is going to sort of, I say she because it really reminds me of the Three Sisters. It's going to come down here and meet this. So you have this kind of dip. And go ahead and make your glacier somehow, whatever. Try to make it different than these, but it's really hard to. Like for me, it's habit. Gonna fill that in. I feel like I need a little more water in my paint. It's dragon. That can sort of go off here. Clean the brush, tap it off. Take just whatever water's left on your brush. If you feel like it's too much, dab it off. And let's just pull it down. Let it fade out. Well, it looks cool, but still kind of strange because we don't have anything on the left side of the mountain. I do like right in here, I had this kind of little funny color bloom happen. And that's where some of the water spread out and some of it just sort of gathered along the line. To me, I like those kinds of things. I'm going to leave it because it looks like I unintentionally tried to paint a little forest in there. So I'm going to leave it. Now let's do this last little one I called the stepsister back here. Paint the left side and little glacier area. Make sure you don't paint over big sister. This one we don't really have to fade out because it's just behind this other mountain. I do feel like I could sponge up some of that paint, make it a little bit lighter because technically it is further away. And so by making the dark shadow side a little bit lighter than this one, it's going to stand out more rather than just sort of disappearing. All right, not bad. It looks really strange right now because, I know I already said that, we don't have the other side painted. For the other side, we want to use the tealy green color, but it needs to be really watered down. So I've got some here. I'm going to add water to it. Let's see. Quite a bit lighter. It might be too light. Let's see how it looks on the canvas. Just go ahead and paint that side, and starting with the big mountain because it's going to be the driest. And I will have us use a very thin, slightly darker outline on the edge to cover up the pencils and then just make it stand out a little more. So I'll get this side too. It's okay if it bleeds a little bit into the glacier part. I definitely had that here and there. It's just a light, pale green. And that's our first layer for the mountains. Just adding a little more dark in this one. I really like that ridge that was a happy little accident. Not bad. I feel like the left side, we're gonna add some streaks of color in a bit. I want it to dry. But let's talk about those. So you can see them in here. Little darker patches. And then when we add the white acrylic marker in there, those really stand out more. And if you look at a mountain, there's little areas where there's rocks and darker surface areas. So you do get these patchy, like they're not like this where there's just smooth and no color. This would be great for like a graphic design sort of thing. But we want to make it look like there's rocks and darker areas, whether they're little canyons, crevasses, whatever, up on the mountains. And I did definitely have some bleed out on the edge with the glacier, where the dark met the light. Totally normal. We'll fix that up. Easy to do. What I want to do now is I do want to get some of this light minty color that we did here down in here, because that is what creates our water area. And the water is basically, it's clear and it's a reflection of the color from the mountains. So let's go ahead and we want to use this color here. You might have to just refresh your paint. Oops, I got it in the brown there. Refresh your paint with a little water and just continue down here. We're just going to scribble back and forth. Water sits flat, so we kind of want to go with that idea in mind. We're going to bring it down. You will pick up a little of the brown, golden brown paint that's around the edges. Don't worry about that. It ends up making a really nice green. So I didn't bring it quite to the edges because our little river here just sort of fades out. Right, looking good. Looking good. That's pretty dry. And so we're going to do a little layering. Mountains were definitely something that I feel like in the last 5 years I've learned a lot about painting them. And just by taking classes from my other teachers, and particularly Paul, who is very, very good at doing mountains. And so watercolor, same thing. This is a learning process, and I'm treating it a lot like the way I paint with acrylic paint. It's just very different. All right, let's go ahead and do some layering on the darker side. Actually, no, I lied. I want to do because we've still got a little bit of this green left, with my number 2 round, let's go ahead and streak in some darker patches. Just little dots and things. Snow and rocks do not blend together in nature, so don't try to blend them together here. I'm going to mix a dot of brown into my what leftover green I have. I don't want this to be darker than this is, but I do want to, yeah, that's too wet. I want to do a little skinny outline. Cover up my pencil lines and just sharpen up the edges of the left side of the mountains. If this is really wet, the light area, your color that you're adding now will kind of bleed into it. So be careful with that. It dries fast, so you'll be able to work pretty quick here. I mean, pretty quickly you'll be able to get back in the game. This is just slightly darker. Has a little bit more brown mixed in. This guy here, I feel like his back outline sort of got lost. And go ahead, so what I had added was a little more brown to like this color. You can see that? It's kind of grayish now. I'm gonna go ahead and dab on some little dark patches on this side. So the mountains end up looking not as vibrant or bright at first until we come in with that white marker. A lot of times I'll come in later, like now, and maybe add little rocky areas. I am running out of paint. By rocky areas, what I mean is like a little area that maybe bumps out, just so it's not such a perfect slope. And then you can take and add a tiny bit more brown to that color that you were just working with. And you can layer some darker areas on the right side because they would have some depth too. There's also rocks and canyons and crevasses and all kinds of things on this other side. It's not perfectly smooth. And if needed, you can take your brush with just water and kind of fade out that edge at the horizon too, like we did where I was saying it kind of creates a fog. This ended up with a really light area. Heavy fog that day. So in traditional watercolor, you would leave the areas like that we come in with the white marker with, you would leave those white or use something called masking fluid, which you can buy at any art supply store. I don't love working with masking fluid. It's really frustrating to me. I found a lot of times it eats up the paper. Like when you try to peel it off, it'll peel some of the paper with it. And I just started kind of doing my own thing and playing around with the white Posca marker, which I actually found out about these through my daughter who does a lot of anime art. And that's what allowed me to paint on top of like some of these, like these stars are all done with that white marker. The feathers around the face, the eye highlights, all done with the white marker. And then of course on this one that we did our first watercolor painting, all of the white was done with that marker. Totally breaking the rules, not going traditional, but I'm happy with it. I like the way it works. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay, looking good. So this is definitely a little more vivid. It kind of looks like someone took a picture and like turned up the brightness and contrast, or maybe the saturation just a little bit. But it's pretty close to this original. Mainly I see it down in here. This is really white in here, and this is a little bit greener. But this is more of a true reflection of the mountains, I guess. And then we do the white pen in here later, so that's going to lighten it up anyways. Let's go ahead and add in these landforms that come in on the side. They are basically the exact same shape. They come down like a hill and then go like this one just kind of goes back. It's actually, if you look at it, it's actually a triangle shape. We just kind of do a more messy triangle so it looks more natural. This one here curves down and also it doesn't go back at such a sharp angle. It's kind of more curved off to the side, but I'll guide you through that. We do it with brown mixed with a little India ink, so it makes a darker brown, and then we're gonna layer some greens in there, and even some purple if you want, yellow, pretty much anything goes. I'll teach you how to draw these little trees. They're very easy because they're so small. Brush wise, just deciding here. I think I'm going to use the number 2. This is a pretty small little canvas we're working with. And my India ink is dried up once again, so I'm going to add a little bit more. I do shake it before all the colors, I shake them up before I add. I don't know why. I just feel like maybe I should do that. They didn't say to do that on the bottles, I don't think, but that's just me. I still got a lot of golden brown left. And you know what, this area here where we mixed the brown and black earlier, that's the perfect spot to use. So go ahead and pull off some brown. You're gonna wanna use probably, if I were to give you a recipe, I would say like maybe 3 parts brown, 1 part black. Let's start with that. Doink. Black, you'll see, darkens it so fast. And let's add some water in there just to make it a little more fluid and a little bit lighter tone. Okay, that's what we want. It's basically this color we used earlier, and when it dries, it should match that. All right, here's what I'm going to do. This overlaps the bottom edge of the mountain and comes down. It's about in line. It ends real close in line to the top of this one. So let's do some marker points. People like that. Let's do a marker point here, and then a marker point down in the water. Mine's a little misaligned on this one, so I'm just gonna go to the left of that a little bit, right about there. It doesn't have to be exact. Yours doesn't have to match mine perfectly. But here's what I wanna do. Just a little wobbly line. You want some flat areas so it would look like a tree could grow out of it. And then this is just gonna wobble back down. You make that wobbly triangle shape, just like I talked about. Let's dip the brush in water and just sort of pull from the inside, pulling from these lines we drew in back into here. Right up to the edge. And we will add more to that. We're gonna add some darker areas, some green spots, but for now it's just gonna look like that. Let's do the other one. Let's make some marker points. Okay, so this, I didn't go all the way up to the edge on this one. I could have, but the mountain just sort of ends there too. So I'm gonna go right about here, make a marker. And then this is gonna end in the water. I want a little gap here, and I want this one, these 2 points, I don't want them to perfectly line up. This one can be a little higher up. So maybe right about there. As long as you have some sort of gap in there. Then it just sort of looks like the river is flowing through. So a little wobbly line here. And then this one's gonna come back very similar to this, maybe a little more rounded. Oops, I brought it all the way to the edge. That's all right. Take a little water. Oops, I didn't want to wipe all my paint off. And let's just fill that in. So because I'm using this more like a wash, you're going to have some light areas where the water is has thinned out the paint. You know what, I'm going to bring it to the edge. It just makes sense to me on this one. All right. Now one thing I do want to do real quick before we go too far, landforms, so our light source is back over here somewhere, and the sunlight is going to make these cast a small shadow into the water. So I want to really water down what's left on my brush and just sort of scribble under here a little bit. You can even pull some of the paint from the bottom of the, that's not dark enough. So we want it to look like it's casting a shadow from these into the water. And that's going to look really cool when we put the white water lines over the top. In fact, I could up the contrast on that by making it a little bit darker than what's in the original. I felt like that kind of got lost in the original. And now's my opportunity to change that up. All right, now we need to take these and make them not look so fake. They look really, you know, they're just placed on there right now. And we need to start turning them to be a little more natural. Let's dip our brush in our dark brown mix. And I want to go along here and I make kind of a rugged edge just by using the tip of the bristles, and I'm just sort of wiggling it up and down. For those of you who have done the acrylic paintings, this is what we call the sound wave technique for doing trees far away, only in this case it's shrubs, grasses, that kind of thing. And rather than having it just go along the line here, I'm also going to do some in here. So they're just darker patches of grass mixed in with some lighter areas, giving it all some nice contrast. You can even put some down here along the shore, especially on this side because it's going to be away from the sunlight. So technically this would be pretty, it'd be pretty much lighter than what you would see down in here. We'll add some green in there too. It's amazing how fast this all dries. Oh, and you know what? I just realized one thing I didn't talk about. I need to remember, I need to have a checklist. That's what I'm going to do. Next time I film a video, I'll have a checklist. I taped my paper down. I'm just using the back of a sketch pad. So I had some, you know, cardboard with that. And I just taped the corners, but some people tape all the way around. And what that does is going to help keep the paper from warping. This, I know I did not tape down. A lot of times when I'm just working on a concept, I just work away and don't tape it down. And you can see it's pretty flat. Sometimes I'll tweak it. But yeah, feel free to do that. It's just, I use the painter's tape or masking tape. Okay, let's get this other one worked up a bit. Same thing, a little sound wave. So it's just you're using the tip of the bristles with the dark brown and black mixed together. And you're drawing what looks like a heart rate monitor or a sound wave along here just by scribbling up and down real light pressure. You can flick up, just flick upward here and there and make some grass. Play around with that. Over here you could do that too if you want. But definitely throw some patches in these other areas too. Deepen those up. And I'm going to add a little more brown down in the water. I feel like it's sort of, I almost had too much water mixed in with the paint there when I did that originally. Okay, let's add some green. You might still have some green left. It's this leaf green that we used, or even the teal would be fine. That's just the blue and yellow with a touch of brown. I'll just use this little well here that I had already made green in. So this is real vibrant. Let's see what that looks like. Because it's on top of brown, you can use it that way. Instead of mixing brown with it, we're going to paint it over brown that's already on the paper. How about that? You can just dab it on. So maybe these are little green shrubs and things, or just maybe there's some patches of green grass in there. And because the brown is already on there, it's doing that job, muting it down. Feel free to play around yourself. You don't have to do everything that I'm doing. You could say, you know what, Jenny, I like that, but you know, I really like yellow too. So I'm gonna add some yellow in there. Doesn't show up very good, but it does show up some. You see that? It really warmed that up there. We will add the purple. But for right now, I want to paint the fir trees in, which I know fir trees can be kind of scary. I feel like they're much easier with watercolor than they are with acrylic paint or oil. These are darker, a little bit darker than the grassy areas we painted on, because I wanted them to stand out more than those, and not just be like this one. If I didn't do it darker, it would have just completely disappeared except for the top area here. So we are going to deepen that dark brown color with a little more India ink than you used before. Let's say about equal parts brown to India ink. Really dark. And then you can kind of brush that around and see. That's maybe a little too dark. Let's go with the 2 parts brown, 1 part India ink. Just make sure that it's darker than your landform. A little bit. A shade or 2. These are still a little bit wet, so I want to be a little careful. They are drying quick. Let's talk about, well, here's what I'll do, just to buy some time and then show you painting trees. I'll just use my major overused scrap paper. See how this leaf ended up? I'm going ADD right here, but like I could trace that. Put a little vein down the center, a little twiggy end. That's cool. See, that's the one I did where I added the water, a lot more water, so it was more discolored on the inside. Back to trees. Okay, so I have 3. You can choose to do 2, 3, 4. Maybe you really like them. You want to load it up. They're all very similar in size, but they're kind of placed at different areas on the grass. So, you know, this one is shorter, this one's taller. I love it when they go above the height of the mountain range, because that gives you the sense of perspective. And what I do is, let's say this is my ground area. Just painting that little sound wave thing that I talked about. I go from the ground up. Some people like to go from the sky down. I've done that before too. I think I just go with whatever my gut tells me at the time. And then at the top of this, I'm using the number 2 round. I do just maybe like 5 or 6 little dots. And what that is like if I were to do a blown up version of the top of a tree, they have this one spike that sticks out. Here's the other 2. Because for those of you who get Christmas trees, this is the part where you put your star on. We just did a tiny version of that. And now we're going to do a tiny version of this. It's just a tiny little mustache on either side. And I'm just, basically I'm lifting and tapping the brush like this. Because that'll give you that fir-like texture, like a fir tree. You don't want to get too wide too soon, or else you can end up with a really wide triangular tree like this. So I keep it narrow and just figure if it looks too much like a column, I'll go back and extend some of the tree boughs out. But I'm just basically doing a stack of mustaches as I work my way down, dabbing right over the tree trunk. Yours might be a little droopy, like maybe your tree boughs go more downward, like that. Mine always kind of tend to flick upward on the edges just a bit. And then I just make it all the way to the ground, and then I'm going to scribble down below a little bit just to create a shadow from the tree, because technically they would cast a shadow behind them. One thing you want to avoid is running out of room. This is what I see a lot in students who are just learning trees. This looks great for graphic design, like a logo for some Northwest company designed by millennials. I hate to say that, but that I noticed that a lot of the young like marketing companies and stuff that are here in the Northwest, they're using that kind of graphical looking tree, and I think it's really cool, like on a hat or something like that. Super cool. But on a painting that we're kind of keeping with the natural feel, we want to make sure we fill these tree boughs in, because this one we just call it the fishbone tree because it really looks a lot like a fishbone. There's a lot of airspace in between each bough. We don't want a ton of airspace. Airspace on the very edges is okay, but in between you wouldn't see all that much. We want these trees to look like they're fairly healthy and not having been blasted by a volcano or anything. So with that being said, let's do it. So this was your, I think I said 2 parts brown, 1 part black is about the right color. Maybe add a drop of water in there to make it more fluid, but I'm not looking to water this down to make it super transparent. And let's go with, how about this one? Nice easy one. I'm gonna start right about here. I'll plant it with a dot. And then I'm just gonna go up and real close to the height of the mountain, maybe even a little taller. Let's go ahead and draw all our tree trunks first. Then I've got one that kind of just goes right here, plant it on the ground, go up. It can be taller than this one or the same height. Then I've got one down here by the shoreline, and it does go a little bit above the hill. Right about there, it's gonna cut right through that glacier of that one lonely little mountain there. All right, now at the top of these, the little row of like somewhere between 4 and 6 little dots. You can hardly see them. On acrylic painting, you can definitely see them really good. Let's switch gears. We'll do a short little stubby mustache here. And then just keep going, lifting and tapping. Just use the very tip of the bristles of this brush. There's no need to use any extra part of the brush because these are small trees. We're kind of like, we're painting like we would, so small like we'd paint on a china cup. Wouldn't that be cute? We don't have a ton more to do here, so we're looking good. All right. Let's get this one. A little mustache at the top. Take your time. If you need to pause me, I know I keep saying that over and over, but please do. There are no perfect trees in nature. I've looked and looked and looked because painters in class are always saying, my trees aren't perfect. And I'm like, okay, so I started looking for perfect trees. And I get a lot of opportunity because I'm artist in residence at Skamania Lodge in Washington State. And it's along the Columbia Gorge. It's about an hour-long drive from Portland. And I see a lot of trees along the way, and I have not seen any perfect trees. So don't feel bad. In a minute, I'll add the shadow behind this one. I was just talking, so I didn't want to switch gears too fast for you guys. I have my moments where I'm like, squirrel. Okay, looking good. If, when these dry, they don't show up very good across this dark brown, like maybe your grassy area is just a little too dark, just stir a little more India ink into your color and come right back over it and make it stand out. It doesn't have to be like super in your face or anything like that, but you do want it to show up some. And now I'm going to take, I want to dab off my brush and then I'll just kind of scribble behind this one like it's casting a shadow back, just grounding the tree. These ones, maybe you don't need to do that. It could scribble in the water a little bit. Technically, they would drop a shadow in the water. But I don't go too nutso about that because it's really easy to go overboard. It's amazing to me. Paul and I talk about this all the time. So Paul's he's my business partner, but also my life partner. We've been married for like 23 years. Yeah, 23 years. And we both took art classes together in college. And yeah, I don't really know where I was going with this. Oh, sorry. It's dinner time. I'm hungry. But we were talking about how every time we teach a painting, it always looks like slightly higher contrast. Like the colors we use are a lot more rich than what they are when we're designing the painting. So I don't know what the phenomenon is there. But it seems to be a very common thing. And I can definitely see it down in here. But it also might be because I don't have the white in there yet. So it's throwing me off a bit. Let's get some purple on here if you want. You don't have to. But you know what? This is your own little world. We can have purple shrubs. They're those like variegated ones that are colorful. Don't put a huge amount on your little palette because you're not going to use a huge amount. Or maybe you are. I'm going to go ahead and pop it up here where I have space. Add a little water. And I'll just tap out a little shrub here. And because it's going over brown, it tones it down and it makes it more of an eggplant color, which is definitely more of a natural color we would see. If you want it more like a violet, you can add a tiny bit of blue. That makes a really pretty color there. Put one over here that's more blue. But really going over the brown, with it being so dark, it is turning really close to the brown color. So I would try to stick with just the plum violet and you'll get that nice eggplant color. You can experiment with using just the pure concentrated color so it stands out just a bit more. Just tap in a little, like, you know, you've seen shrubs. You probably have them in your yard. They're kind of roundish. Put one right here. You can also do this with green. Let's try a vibrant green. Pop it up here. I'm not bothering washing my brush between because I know I'm done with the yellow. I know I did that earlier, but you could even make some that kind of go above the water line. Here, maybe this is some kind of green shrub that's just kind of faded out in the dying light of the sunset. Go an extra. Okay, let's let that dry. And we're going to outline our leaves with the little Micron marker and draw the little vein down the middle. So we're doing exactly this, but with the Micron marker, not the paintbrush, unless you want to use the paintbrush. And that's going to allow this to dry so we can come in with the white and have fun with that stuff. And then we'll be done. So for the leaves, you decide if you want to leave them like they are. Like, I think they look really nice just the way they are. But if you want that sort of illustrative look, which I'm very fond of, just outline your leaf, make a quick little vein down the center. And I don't stress too much about getting a perfect outline. You can see looking through here, there's some parts where the green extends beyond the pen. And I happen to like that look. I've done some experiments before, well, that one was really bad, where I've done a bunch of blobs of paint on watercolor paper and let it dry. And then I've come back in with, I have these Micron markers. You can buy a set in a full color range. So I have like a kind of burnt sienna color, kind of a rusty brown color. I have green, I have red, I have a plum violet color. And I've come through and I've seen like little color blooms and stuff in the watercolor. I'm like, oh, I'll turn that into a shrub. And I'll just like trace kind of around the edge with the marker, and they end up so cool. I love the look of that. I think we should do one of those at some point. It's super free and forgiving, really good for your brain to sort of let loose beyond the rigid stuff we're constantly having to do. There. I like that. See, I can't decide which way I like better, if I like it outlined or not outlined. Either way is cool. And then this sort of aubergine color or eggplant color is drying. The mountains are nice and dry though, so we're ready to add white highlights there. So I'll talk real quick, like we just have a few minutes left of this painting, and I'll talk real quick about all the steps we're going to do. It's all with that white Posca marker. We are putting white snow, or snow that's kind of, you know, brightened up in the sun on the left side of each mountain. I even put some here where there's that little bump out. That can get kind of complicated. And then I do some little white dots for little white flowers, or maybe those like dandelion puffs. I just love the look of that. It makes it look so magical. And then I do these horizontal lines along the shore here and in the water, just to, especially back here, to separate the mountain from the lake there, or the river. And it does really help, especially going over these dark shadows with that white. It's gonna look really good. I'm excited to have a little bit darker shadows in this one. Let's start with the mountains though. Now your Posca marker, if you haven't used it yet, you'll want to unwrap it, shake it really good. Every time you use it, you want to shake it, shake that paint around. I have found that they really do have to be shaken a lot because it'll separate inside and you'll get like kind of a watery paint. So I just kind of go crazy with it. And all these little white marks that you see on my cardboard here are me taking and I press the pen to get the paint flowing. This one I think has been overused. My daughter and I both use it, so I think it's running out. Usually I'll get a big flood of watery paint that comes out. But this will work. Okay, so I'm going to take and I'll just, these little patches that are lighter, I just scribble in them to lighten them up. And I do like to come along the edge here sometimes. You can add as much lightness as you like because it is not going to be pure white. You'll be able to see a bit of the greenish through it. Now you can go over it again when it dries and make it even more opaque. But I really like that. This is like when we do our acrylic paintings in the studio and we take the brush and we scrape the white down the one side, or you can use a palette knife. We're doing essentially that. It's just we're using this marker. And then if you want to do a little highlight along there, you can always take your paintbrush with some water, just a little bit damp, not drippy water, and you can paint this out. You can like blend it in. This one over here is a peekaboo view, so we'll get a little bit of white in there. Not a ton, because it's just a tiny view there. Get some white here. And I just kind of look at it as I go along and decide how much white do I want. This one here is maybe a little closer to where the sun is setting, so maybe it's going to get a little more white. Almost done here. You can do a white line along the left edge of the glacier too. That really helps make it pop out. And my land is still, the purple still has a little bit of wet paint on it. So I'm going to work on the water now. And this is like the ooh and ah time. I love this part so much. I'm just going to back here real lightly do a kind of broken up horizontal line. So that's the flat water line that's in the distance. And look, you can see that area where the paint kind of flooded funny earlier, and I told you it looked like I mistakenly painted trees there. I love that. That's a happy accident. So I'll just kind of paint in some horizontal lines. And then along the land, you want to go right over the shadows. That's how the water flows. Careful if your purple's still wet. So water, when it breaks against the shore, it is going to be a little lighter in the painting world. That looks super cool. And now I'll just add some more like water flowing lines. They're kind of horizontal scribbles. I need more paint coming out of this marker. I'm going to flatten the tip of this by jabbing it so hard. You guys should have nice fresh ones. I think this one's been used for months. And you can decide at what point you are done with adding these white paint streaks. I know there's a little paint left in there. There won't be after all this. And any one you want to brighten up, just go over it again. Just like you would with the paintbrush, adding white paint. Now this is something you can do also with acrylic paint, very little acrylic paint. You can use a more opaque type of watercolor called gouache. Hopefully I said that right. I have some gouache, I just haven't played around with it a ton. Maybe that'll be my next thing. I like to experiment. It's super fun. And it's good for you. You learn what you like and you learn what you hate. Okay, so let's go ahead and do, these are just like we do the stars, just teeny tiny little dots with the tip of the pen. You can do them in little clusters, like I always imagine there's just little white flowers growing along here, or those little dandelion puff things. And I put them in like here's a little patch that bloomed. Then maybe there's a bare spot, and then maybe along the water there's a little patch here. And then I'll do a few over here. Because why not? It just gives it that touch of magic that is so fun to see in paintings. And I love this. I love the way it turned out. I do, just like I thought I would, I do like the deeper shadows in the water where I've painted the white water over the top. It just gives it a definite higher contrast here. And I would say overall, things are a lot bigger in this one. My trees are a bit bigger. Mountain range is really similar in size. This one's probably a tiny bit bigger. But overall, I'm happy with it. I do like it. And I hope you guys like yours too. And if you want to do another one, like I said, this is kind of big with the bark and the leaves. So I don't know if you can fit 2 of these on here, but maybe, take something smaller to trace. Not one of these, but something similar in size. How about like the bottom of a jar? You can do mini paintings all day. And then I do want to sign my painting. I will just usually initial it, or however you want to sign your work, with pencil, and I write the year. You can write quarantine 2020. Maybe you guys will become like these amazing artists during this time. And look at, probably none of us thought about the quarantine the whole time that we were painting here. We were thinking just about our painting and how to get the colors right and all of that fun stuff. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I will see you next time. I think I'm going to be doing Tuscany, and then we'll be moving on to the India ink paintings. So here's Tuscany. I will have us tape off a border so it looks better that way. And then this one uses all the colors in your kit. So the one color we didn't use with this guy was the poppy red. Although you could. Feel free to throw it in there anywhere. So this one will use all the colors. And then we have just the India ink ones coming up. So the owl, this one you have your template for. And that way you don't have to draw it out. You're just gonna use your graphite paper, your template, trace it all up. I'll guide you through that. And that will save you a lot of drawing time. And then we've got this just sort of Japanese looking Mount Fuji painting with bamboo. All done with the India ink. So we've got some fun times ahead of us. I'm looking forward to teaching him. Had a great time today. Hope you guys did too. Post any questions that you might have. Please like and subscribe to our videos because that helps us to reach more viewers. And have a great day. Rest of your day. Go drink some wine and or tea. And just keep painting. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.